So let's go ahead and get started. Those of you that were just in the Zoom meeting with me for EDL700, yeah, hi Richard and Catherine and Ray, and I'm trying to see everybody. Jennifer, nice to see you again. So I told the class earlier that I felt a migraine coming on. Well, the good news is, since I've been drinking my coffee, which I'll probably be up all night now, but that's okay. It's starting to, it's not subsiding, but it's not getting worse. So, you know, just to warn you guys that if I suddenly disappear from the screen, I'll be back, or I'll at least chat with you and tell you that we're not going to be back. And then also to, just to let you know, I'm sorry, I just had an email pop up, so sorry about that. I totally lost my train of thought. I don't even know what I was going to say.
That if you leave, that it's because of your headache.
Yeah, and thank you, Ray. And the other part of that was, too, that the medicine that I'm on obviously makes me a little bit loopy, so I can't even remember what I was just going to say. So, yeah, Richard, you're right. Yeah, my train of thought. So anyway, if I say something that sounds truly ridiculous, which is entirely possible, y'all just call me out on it. Or if I start rambling, just somebody, yell at me or something. So I'm going to start with, I know we went over it a little bit already, but the midterm case study assignment, do you guys have questions? Do I need to run through it again real quickly? Give me some sense of what you guys need in terms of support.
I thought it was very self-explanatory.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Richard, go ahead.
I do have one quick question. The only part that I'm struggling a little bit with is the part about the administration. Bringing it up and trying to scroll down to it. Also, I feel like I'm being a little long-winded because I did work my way through and then read at the end that it's supposed to be like 8 pages, and I think I'm on page 10. That's
okay. I mean, I'm not going to penalize you for doing too much, but at the same time, don't kill yourself doing too much. But that's fine. So sorry, I'm just pulling this up real quick.
Trying to make sure I'm not being long-winded here. Geez, here we go. It was the information about how effective is your school in ensuring high-quality leadership and management. When it comes to like questions about the administrator, like I see, I'm just looking at the example that you had. You have the principal, experience, certifications, just like kind of demographic information. Right. I've been trying to basically, we just got back on Monday with we're doing professional development all these 2 weeks. I'm trying to corner my principals long enough for them to get me to tell me this information.
Okay. Richard, I looked mine up online. You could see everyone's degrees online on Louisiana Believes.
Yeah, I was going to say
their name. Yeah,
I can't find any. Okay. Without loud capping my principals, they may have been principals so long that they don't have any more teaching certifications.
Okay.
So I don't know of any other certificate. Like I did look on Louisiana Believes, but I don't know of any other certifications that they might have.
That's okay, because again, this is really for your personal benefit as much as anything. So I would just try to put in what you know, but I'm not going to get real hung up on if you can't tell me how many years of experience they've had or, anything like that. Certifications, you can always just list what's on, Louisiana Believes. And for those of you that are not in Louisiana, pretty much every state has a portal through their Department of Education sites that you can look up someone's certification. Like if you go to Texas, you can look mine up. You'd have to put in Fraley because that was my name when I got certified, and see all that. So like I said, just do the best you can, but I also know how crazy things are with you guys coming back as teachers, plus for principals and all. Yeah, and I'd probably be a little irritated if a teacher was wanting me to sit down and give them all this information if their week's anything like mine. So just do the best you can.
All right. Thank you for clearing that up.
You're welcome. And like I said, some of it you may know, anyway, but you may not. But like I said, don't get too hung up on that one. Okay. All right. Any other things you guys want me to look at with you guys while I've got this pulled up here? I'm in this sample. I'm not, so it's a pretty comprehensive sample. So I hope that, it makes it pretty self-explanatory, like Ray was saying.
Tracy, I have one question.
Sure. Go ahead, Nicole.
I was doing the Hispanic and non-Hispanic, and I was kind of looking. I know it sounds so crazy, but I'm a numbers person,
Uh-huh.
and it wasn't matching up. I would think the non-Hispanic and Hispanic, when I added them together, should be all my students. It's not.
No, and
Okay,
here's,
so
yeah, here's why. A few years ago, I don't remember how many, the U.S. Department of the census people. I don't know. I can't remember which particular agency it was. There was a lot of confusion about the difference between ethnicity and race. And so they defined, so like if you fill out a form that's fairly new, one of the first questions it'll ask you is, are you of Hispanic descent or not? And, you know, if you check yes, then you go through and there's a whole, because that is your race. Then there's a whole list of different ethnicities. So you may be, I don't know, Mexican, you may be Spanish, you may be from El Salvador, etc. For those that are not of Hispanic descent, then it will give you, you know, you're white or African American or whatever. So the reason that those two numbers don't always add up is because it's a two-pronged question now. People don't know how to answer it correctly. Does that make sense?
yes, ma'am. On ours, we looked on our. We have a JPAM system, and the strategist went and looked on. I just went back to my old school.
Yeah.
And now I'm in the district, so she looked back and she didn't put any numbers for that. So
Yeah.
I have no data for that. And I was like, well, maybe if I subtract the Hispanic from the total. So, and then I looked on that one and it didn't help me. So that's why I had that question.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's not an exact science because it all depends on where they're pulling the data from and how the questions were asked. So yeah, I've had instances too, you know, now Texas, we've finally kind of figured it out and they got pretty good about being consistent across districts. But, you know, a great example, when I was a high school principal, particularly at the Performing Arts High School, you know, students, when we would, you know, fill out like demographic sheets to take the state test or whatever, they didn't like the option, so they create their own. You know, things like I'm all, or, you know, I'm a unicorn. I mean, you know, they had all these creative answers. So, you know, we get back our demographic data pull from all this, and I'm like, what in the world is this? Because, you know, I had 950 students, but I only had 800. If you added all of the different ethnicities together or the races, I'd come up with like 875. And I'm like, what is going on? Well, it's because the machine scoring couldn't read that I'm a unicorn, or, you know, whatever the kid decided to put. So that's why there's going to be some weird anomalies in the data a lot of times.
So it's okay that I leave it as 0 as our, okay, because that's what our stuff says.
Yeah, that's fine. And then, like I said, you know, too, there's federal indicators, there's state indicators. Some districts have their own special indicators and coding and all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, it's not uncommon for the numbers to not make sense.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else have questions, comments, concerns? Are we good? Hallelujah. You're definitely my gifted and talented group. Okay, let me pull up, sorry, the presentation and we'll get right into that. Okay, all right, so I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, can you guys see my screen okay? We good? Okay, thank you. All right, let me get this started, sorry. Come on, computer, work with me here. There we go. Okay, so just like I did last time in the EDL700 Zoom meeting, I shamelessly stole another group's presentation, and I did the same thing tonight because this is really talking about, and I think it's one of the best ones I've seen. It talks about informative assessment. You know, we talk all the time about formative assessment and summative assessment and stuff like that, but this is really taking it to the level of what assessment should be, which is to inform instructional decisions. So I happened to go to this particular workshop, and it's from a group that's called SPI, and it's their presentation. So just so kind of know where I got this from. So the whole idea behind it is this, that according to researcher W. James Popham, if we really are going to use assessment the way we should consider it to be information providing, as well as something that is going to help us codify and quantify what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. So I think I've shared with some of the other students that, you know, I'm reading some grants for the Federal Department of Education right now and reviewing it. And it's about how to improve school climate, and there's a whole section where they're scored on how do you use assessment as a part of evaluating your progress towards your goals for school climate. And I'm amazed how many of these, you know, very large, pretty well-known school districts don't talk about or use formative assessment. All they're doing is summative, and they're not using, they don't have a linkage between what the data is telling them and what they need to do. So it's really important, guys, that we understand the difference between formative assessment, summative assessment, and when to use both of them. Okay, they both have a place in the work that we do, but it's essential that we understand the differences and we know when to use them. So not only can you use this in your school and in the leadership role, but if you ever write a grant, remember, Tracy said, put in formative assessment, put in formative assessment. So formative assessment is pretty simply just that process that teachers use with their students so that they can adjust what they're currently doing. In an ideal world, in an ideal classroom, you will do multiple formative assessments during a single class period or lesson. Now, we tend to think of assessment as something that has to be very formal in terms of it's maybe a piece of paper, it's a project, or whatever. That might be appropriate for summative assessment, but the best formative assessments are simple, quick, and easy. So things like thumbs up, thumbs down, you know, or the neutral, maybe or maybe not, you know, show me on your fingers, you know, what's your choice, blah, blah, blah. That is a way that you can quickly scan the room and get an idea of where everybody is in terms of understanding the work or the objectives for that day. So it's a way that you can actually adjust in the moment your instruction. So, for example, one of the best superstar teachers I've ever seen, she was absolutely phenomenal. She was a 4th grade bilingual teacher. And she had this really awesome lesson going. The kids were working in groups. They were very self-sufficient. I mean, and they knew when to rotate. She didn't have to say a thing. They just knew exactly what to do. But she would go around and she would do these quick sort of informal checks. And she noticed that there was one group that was really struggling more than others. She literally changed in that moment that activity and how they were working with others collaboratively so that those students got it. And she did pulled them out, did a quick teach with them to make sure they really understood it, then they flowed right back into the system. That's how formative assessment should be used, okay? So, like I said, you can do yes, no, maybe or a few. So, what does research say about informative assessment or formative assessment? They're ongoing. It can include something you observe. It can include something you look at or review. Generally, though, formative assessment is non-graded. It's really feedback for the teacher to adjust and understand where the students are in the learning cycle. It's used to help us improve our instructional methods. It is also really powerful to help students. So, you know, in an ideal world, students will begin to gauge their own learning. When you use formative assessment frequently throughout a lesson, students get a pretty good sense of what they're getting and what they're not getting. So, you know, for example, I've seen teachers who use the red, yellow, green cup method. So they get, you know, just plastic drink cups in those 3 colors are put on every student's desk. And when the students are working either in groups or collaboration or even independently, they can let the teacher know where they are. So if I've got my green cup on top, or if that's the most visible one, I'm good. I got this. I don't have any questions. Just let me work. If I've got yellow, that means that I'm a little bit unsure, but I think I'm okay. So that might signal the teacher just to come by and do a quick drive-by look at the student's work to make sure that they're not doing something incorrectly or developing a misconception. If a student is like lost or has a question, needs the teacher's help and support, they put up a red cup. So as a teacher in that facilitation mode, you can constantly see where your kids are and adjust and provide that individual attention as needed. so much better than raise your hand and, everybody has to stop and listen to so-and-so. This keeps that seamless movement of teaching and learning happening throughout the lesson. It also helps students to have that intrinsic sense of motivation, because if I'm not getting it, but I see that 3 other students also have their red cups up, you know what? I don't feel embarrassed about asking my question. Or for the student who would never, ever, ever raise their hand and ask a question in front of their peers, there's other ways that they can communicate they need help, okay? So I don't know if my video is going to work or not. I'm probably not going to show it just because of the length. But, when you get the PowerPoint tonight, do go in and look at this video, because it's really, teachers talking about how they used it and how it changed their teaching. It's pretty powerful, okay? So I'm going to unshare for a second. So we're going to do a quick formative assessment. So thumbs up if you feel like you know the purpose of informative assessment, down if you don't, or if you're like, I'm still a little bit shaky. Let me see. Okay, awesome. I got to switch pages, everybody. Okay, everybody's good. It's because you're superstar learners. Thank you. Okay, let me go back to sharing. Oops, share. Okay, so, sorry, it's not working all of a sudden. There we go. So, this flow chart shows you how formative assessment generates that timely student achievement information, and then how it breaks out into almost that RTI model. So, and if you have taken or you're in that PLC class, EDL700, remember the key questions. What did students know or not know? What did the student, can they do or not do? What are we going to do about it? This model allows you to create that flow chart of those tiers of where our students are. Another quick and easy way to do this is also to use an exit ticket. I always did exit tickets. I even still do them when I do like professional development presentations and stuff. I still do exit tickets. And it can be something as simple as, tell me 3 things you learned today. Tell me 2 things that you feel like you've mastered. Tell me the 1 thing you still have questions about. And I had my students do them on index cards, collect them at the end of the class. I'd read through them real quick that night, and then I would adjust my lesson the next day. Because if 50% of my students all say, I still have questions about how do you factor, an exponential equation, then I knew I needed to probably go back over that again with the majority of the class. But I also, and I had them put their names on it too, it's a great way to pull maybe a small group out that needs some more reteaching. They're going to be your tier 2 kids that you maybe can do in the moment of a classroom, but some kind of an exit ticket so that I can consistently see where my students are, adjust my instruction accordingly, and then provide that RTI that may be needed for a few or more of the students, okay? So, I don't know what this is doing. It is not liking me. There we go. So it's really twofold, and we've talked about this. So you're trying to move your students' learning forward, but you're also getting feedback on the effectiveness of your instruction. So I would do, as a principal, when I would go in, and I was constantly in and out of classrooms. It just was the norm of how we did things. But one of the things that I would do is when I would go in and I would see a teacher, we were focusing on our big push, we had 3 major areas with student engagement and students being able to work on mindsets and a couple other things. But anyway, if I would, happen to be in your classroom for my 3-minute walkthrough kind of thing, and I saw that you were doing this great strategy, like vocabulary that, we wanted everybody to use, I gave you a thumbs up. Or I would carry a sticky pad with me and I'd put a star on it. And I would just, stick it on your desk or whatever. And I thought for a long time, this is really not making a difference. It's really kind of cheesy and I feel somewhat stupid doing it. But it wasn't until my jaded high school teachers, so those of you that work in high schools, you know what I'm talking about. Their high school teachers kind of like students. They try to be really cool, and you think that the things that an elementary teacher loves, a high school teacher is not. But anyway, I started noticing that when I would go in people's classrooms for about a month or 2 into school, and people had all of these sticky notes just stuck on the wall or on their board or whatever, where they'd gotten a star from me. So just even with adults, that little bit of formative assessment and positive reinforcement when people are doing what you want them to do or learning what you want them to learn can be really, really powerful. It's not just an audit of learning. It's really a way to improve and deepen learning for all levels of learners, whether it's a colleague or it's a student, okay? So we have to make sure that when we are doing this, that we are not only acting upon it, but we have time to reflect on it, okay? So we're going to skip these activities, sorry. So why is this important, and what are some of the benefits? It helps us to understand and know, what our students need assistance with. It allows us to make anywhere from minor modifications to major changes in our instruction. And it also helps us to group our students more appropriately. So we all know that homogeneous grouping is not the best way to group students permanently. That, it's better to have heterogeneous grouping, when you develop a class or whatever. However, within that class, there are times that homogeneous grouping is very helpful. And so, like I said, if you've got a list of 5 things that students need to learn in a particular lesson, 5 different learning objectives, and you realize that there's a group, there's a number of students who maybe have not mastered one of those, you can do a homogeneous group, pull them aside, give them alternative instruction and support, and then they can, again, like I gave you my example about my 4th grade teacher, they can flow seamlessly back into this. It also helps students gauge where they are. I firmly believe, and research has proven, that not only do teachers need to be able to know what students' strengths and weaknesses are instructionally and what standards they've mastered and which ones they haven't, etc. Students doing their own self-profiling is a very, very powerful learning tool. And you can use this formative assessment for the students to use as a part of that student individual profiling they may do, okay? So, what do we know too? Formative assessment, what are the benefits? Well, let's talk about the research. It increases motivation. It increases responsibility. Assessment doesn't become scary. I think a lot of times we create sometimes that fear of a test or an assessment in our students, and we don't mean to. But if we just freely do assessments all the time with our students, then it doesn't become this big, scary sort of, process. So, I would tell my students, I'm like, okay, we're going to stop for a second. It's time for a quick formative assessment. So, on your index cards, scale of 1 to 5, show me where you are with blah, blah, blah. And so the students would put up their index card, and I constantly use the term assessment because, again, it somewhat demystifies that word and takes out that scary element that some of our kids feel when you talk about testing. So it also helps students with, their own goal setting and their own personal growth. Okay, so here's a couple of other ones that are just ideas. So thumbs up, thumbs down. You can use it in collaborative learning. I'm a very non-traditional kind of teacher, so I was the weird high school principal that gave every one of my high school students my personal cell phone number with parameters. Mainly that you can never, ever, ever, under no circumstances, give this number to your parents. And don't call me, text me, because I don't listen to voicemails because I'm a teenager at heart. But I would get students in class, I'm like, pull out your phone. And I would do a quick poll everywhere so that I could instantly get results. And the kids love getting to use their technology. Think, pair, share. I think most people are familiar with that. And numbered heads together, same thing. If you're not familiar with that, basically you number off in the classroom maybe 1 to 4, and then all the ones get together and share, and all the 2s, etc. Okay, so we're going to skip some of that. So one of the ways that we can look at assessment too is, it's sort of that idea of if we're looking at learning. So we have to quantify it in some ways, i.e. a grade, but it really also should be about the quality of learning. I'm going to give you what I think is a pretty good example. So I was the student in high school who took the highest level math classes I could. Okay, so I'm a senior taking calculus, which is a college level course, right? And I did well. I got an A. But I realized later on in life that I really never learned any mathematical concepts. All I learned how to do was to manipulate a formula or a math problem based on that formulaic sort of process. So for example, we decide that we're going to lay new tile floor in one of the rooms of our house. And I cannot for the life of me figure out how many pieces of tile we need. Can't do it. I tutored people in calculus in college. That's partly how I put myself through. But I couldn't figure out how to do and figure out how much tile I needed. My husband's like, this is like the simplest thing ever. What is wrong with you? Because I became a manipulator of formulas and systems. So my quantity of work was really good and really high, but my quality of my learning was really low. Nobody ever looked at my conceptual knowledge. So I had this huge gap. So when we do constant and continual formative assessment, we've got to look at both, guys. It's not just getting the right answer. It's really understanding, did they learn at the conceptual level? Because that's the only way that students can be successful. So again, it provides not only the marking and grading, but there has to be discussion about learning in depth. And then we also, instead of comparing our students all the time to each other, it's really looking at them from an individual basis. So, you know, we talked about, I think last time, that growth model that Texas has adopted, and I think others are moving towards. It's not about hitting a standard as much as, are you growing at least a year or more every year that you're in school in terms of your achievement, okay? So, agree or disagree. So if you agree, you're going to show me a 1. If you disagree, you're going to show me a 2. So read this statement and then show me whether you agree or disagree. So 1, you agree, 2, you disagree. Okay, so I've got to kind of look at, not everybody has their video on, so I have to kind of scroll here. Okay, looks like we're pretty consistently 1s. So yeah, I think the whole premise behind this is the idea that when we have to, you know, they say that you learn things best when you have to teach them. So something that you teach over time, you really learn. It's the same kind of idea here, that we have to get people to be able to articulate their learning, defend it, and then, you know, give contradictory or additional information or whatever, and then allow students to adjust their position. I think too often we get in the mindset that there's only one right answer, and that's not the case in many things. Okay, so let's go back. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. That's why. Duh. Told you, a little bit crazy tonight. Okay, so tell me again, 1 or 2, do you agree or disagree? Using benchmark assessments 2 to 3 times per year is informative assessment. Okay, thanks, Kelsey. I see you. Okay. Yeah, Catherine got it. Okay. Yeah, you guys are right. Remember, benchmark assessments is really more of a summative assessment piece. Informative assessment or formative assessment, whichever term you use, can happen multiple times within a class period. It's not something you only do 2 to 3 times a year. If you only do it 2 to 3 times a year, oftentimes that is historical data, and it's too late for you to do anything about. Okay? It's done past, you've moved on, and it's too late. That's why formative assessment is so powerful. Okay? This is just a chart that shows you the way that this works. So you can see frequency of administration is very high for formative assessment. It can be minute by minute integrated in, whereas our summative is something that is done less frequently. Now, benchmarks really technically would fall in the interim category in that they're instructional and evaluative. They may predict something about students learning in the future, and those should be done, you know, periodically. Some people would say monthly, some people say every grading period, some say each quarter. It doesn't matter. That's really a decision that each individual group has to make. But formative assessment, like I said, is really the key here. Okay? Sorry, I'm just going to skip through some of these. Oops, I did one. So there is a book called Ahead of the Curve where Thomas Geske talks about some of these things. So if you really want more information or you feel like, gosh, this is a great book study, maybe for my school to do because we're not using data and assessment the way we should, really good, okay? So, this is a lot of this is repetitive. So motivate, people talk all the time about students are not motivated to learn, like we have to do something spectacular. That's not true, guys. Research has proven that motivation about learning increases when students understand and see the gap between what they thought they knew and what they actually know. So again, going back to summative assessment, it's not very motivating for me to take a test in May or April, and I don't actually know my results till 2-3 months later, and I'm supposed to be motivated to learn the things that I didn't do well on. There's too much time lapse. But if you want students to be motivated about learning, formative assessment provides that great opportunity. And it creates a really strong and positive school and classroom culture where you're focused on individual growth, and it's not a matter of comparing. It's not like we have to be on the bell curve. Okay, a lot of people back in my day that were Madeline Hunter devotees called these checks for understanding. So again, you guys are way too young to probably even know who Madeline Hunter is, but she had a great lesson planning process. Okay. Oh, I'm just curious what you think about this. So agree or disagree? Teachers won't use informative assessments if they can't grade them. Agree is 1, 2 is disagree. Yeah, it's kind of a mix of people. Yeah, a lot of I've heard teachers say, I'm not going to do that because I can't grade it. And I'm like, you don't have to grade it. It's not about them, it's about you. It's about your instruction and what information you need to know to be more effective. Okay, so you can see the differences. And again, I'm not going to go through all that. But I think the 2 words that if I look at this chart that really stand out are the idea that it's fluid. So informative assessment is fluid. It's an ongoing process, okay? Whereas summative is rigid, okay? It's a measure of what the student has achieved. We can debate whether or not it's an accurate measure or not. But the idea behind it is that if we're really focused on continual improvement and enhancing and deepening student learning, informative instruction is where it's at, okay? So how do you tell the difference? Very simple. If it occurs after learning is complete, then it is summative. It's informative depending on how and when it's used and who's seeing the information. Generally, I wouldn't share formative assessment data with parents or anything like that unless you start to see a pattern, and then you might want to pull that in. But basically, it's really, again, like I said, for the student and for the teacher in the moment. Okay. So, sorry, a lot of this. Okay. Again, some of these things that we've talked about, part of what you're doing in the assignment this time in the case study is that self-evaluation, because that's informative assessment that I can use to know where you are and to hopefully provide that scaffolded learning you might need, but it's also important for you to know where you are and maybe some areas that you want to seek or research additional information. Another thing too that a lot of people are not aware of with assessment is that we can teach a misconception and not even realize it. So I guess the best example for me would be, a teacher assigns a math homework that has 30 problems. Students go home, do their homework to solve these 30 problems. The student solves all 30 problems incorrectly. We have now created a new learning for that child. It's the wrong learning. They didn't do it correctly. We've created a misconception. But once we practice something like that and it becomes new learning, because remember, new learning is not necessarily good or bad, but in this case, wrong learning, it takes 21 solid guided repetitions to unlearn a misconception. That's why formative assessment is critical, because the last thing you want to do is send a child home to learn and do something wrong, because it takes you 21 structured reteaches to undo a misconception. So we see this oftentimes, but when students hit algebra or English 1, it tends to hit them their 9th grade year. There is so much scaffolded learning that has to have occurred for students to be successful in those 2 9th grade gateway courses. And a lot of times what we find is when we really start doing that formative assessment and maybe some pre-testing and things and looking at it, students have so many misconceptions from younger years that they have carried forward, that those gateway courses in 9th grade, Algebra 1 and English 1, become very, very challenging and difficult for the student. So we have to be so careful that we don't inadvertently teach misconceptions. And one way to do that is to make sure we don't by using formative assessment, okay? So we've talked about these questions a million times. What do we expect students to learn? You need clearly learned targets. How will we know if they're learning? Formative assessment. What will you do with the students who are already proficient? You know, some students got it the first time, and you going over it a second or a third time for the few that didn't is absolutely going to drive them crazy, create discipline problems, create boredom, etc. So we have to be prepared with what do we do with those students who know it already, and then how do we help our students who maybe didn't learn it. So formative assessment is important on both ends of the spectrum, those who need additional help and support, as well as those who are already at or above mastery, okay? So, filling the gaps. Remember, one of the things that can guide us is to have a great learning target. And when we have that great learning target or learning objective or whatever you want to call it, the better we're going to do. So writing a SMART goal is really helpful and important in doing this. Okay. So 3 questions is another kind of thing about how you use formative assessment. So where am I going? What will I be able to do when I finish this lesson? You know, a million years ago, I had a really great teacher in my undergraduate degree, and he had us keep what he called a learning journal. And what we had to do in that learning journal every single time was we had to record what it was that, you know, at the beginning of the lesson, what we hoped we learned, and then he would throw in, you know, as, you know, then he would do like a stop in the middle of a lecture, whatever, where am I now? You know, what do I know? What do I still have questions about? Where am I? And then we had to do the summative piece. So where I still have a gap, how can I fill it in? So maybe, you know, I feel like, okay, he went over 5 topics and I feel really good about 4 of them, but I still have questions about this 5th one. So what do I need to do? Do I need to, you know, schedule time to talk to the professor? Do I need to do some research? Can I ask a fellow student, etc.? So if we really use formative assessment in the right way, we get students to be reflective of their own learning, engage where they are. And again, just another way to pull in that metacognition where we think about learning, how we're learning, and where we are. Greatly reinforces concepts that we want students to internalize. Same kind of questions, thing here from before. What do we expect students to learn? How will we know if they've learned it? What will we do when they are proficient? And what do we do when they don't learn? Okay. So the other key question, though, is what evidence will we accept from our students? So we may have to teach them. How do they know? What are things that they can use? Okay. So as we've talked about, it is an instructional tool as well as a student accountability tool. Okay. They're both important, so we have to make sure we're doing both of those. So assessment versus grading. So what feedback are you trying to give to your students or to yourself? Okay. Interesting question. So if we're giving true, descriptive, and evaluative feedback, that is assessing. When we're assigning a number or a letter to it, that is grading. Which do you think, I'm curious, which do you think is more valuable to students? A grade or feedback? Somebody chime in or I'm going to call on y'all.
I think when students think about it, like if you ask their perspective, they're going to say grade because everything's like based on grades. You know, they want to get good grades because good grades gives you TOPS, scholarships, opportunities, you know, AP classes. So they're so grade. But I mean, even in like elementary, they know that they have to get a passing grade so that they can get promoted to the next grade level. So even from early on all the way through, it's all based on your grades.
Yeah, that's a good point, Melissa. And I've even had instances where I had a really outstanding advanced placement teacher. She was teaching the advanced placement American history. She didn't give grades. She only gave feedback. And she was doing that in order to prepare the students for the AP exam, because that's the ultimate outcome, right? We want you to get that 3 or 4 on the advanced placement exam. So, you know, it can either be counted as college credit, or you can maybe, instead of taking that course, you can advance to the next level course. Parents got furious with her, created all kinds of problems for me because we weren't awarding grades, because they didn't understand that it's really about learning. It's not about a grade. In fact, not a lot, but there is a movement to get rid of grades in a lot of school systems, because people focus on the grade that doesn't really tell you anything. You know, if I get an A+ in a class, I may have got it because I'm really good about turning in all my assignments and completing everything, but I bombed all the tests. Conversely, I may be that student who never does a stitch of homework, never does all that, but I can ace your test because I know the content, but I get a failing grade. So the grade doesn't really tell us anything. And I think that the reason our students, just like Melissa said, our students and our parents are so focused on grades is because we've never really explained to them what true learning looks like and what true assessment looks like. So I think the one system that is really strong that focuses on true feedback and assessment is, if you're familiar with the Montessori method of schools and teaching, they don't give grades, because it's all about this continuum of learning. They do narrative assessments so that we know, you know, because I mean, now I'm an educator, but wouldn't you rather know that I know how to do these, you know, 15 math skills and I'm at mastery or above, but I don't know how to do these 2, then I got a B in my previous math class. The problem is we as educators are not very good about explaining and selling what we should be doing, because the old system focuses just on a grade. But I think over time you're going to see a shift away from grades, because there's so many issues with grade inflation, and you know, and oh my gosh, you got Professor so-and-so and they grade so hard, and where so-and-so grades so easy. You know, like I said, it's something that I think is an ongoing conversation. But when you can, give as much evaluative feedback as you can. And I'm even going to pick on you guys a little bit. I think if all I did was post a grade and I don't give you any feedback, you know, if you got a good grade, you're probably like, yay. But isn't it nice to be affirmed where you did things well? Or if you didn't get full points, to know why you didn't. So just like I said, I want you to be aware of the value and importance of those critical concepts. Okay, so we've done these. Why is this not moving? That's because I'm on, there we go. So another idea of an exit slip that, you know, if I were going to be mean, I'd make y'all do this, but I'm not. So what have you learned today about formative assessment that will enable you to strengthen your instruction? So if you're at a red point, you know, you need more help. A yellow, something I'm understanding. Green, I feel really great about this. I'm ready to go and I can go out and use this tomorrow. Okay, so we're going to do a 1, 2, 3. So a 1 is green, 2 is yellow, 3 is red. Okay, 1, I got it, I'm ready to go. 2, still need a little bit more, just give me some time to think about it. 3, okay, Tracy, I need that one-on-one reteach. Okay, so yeah, pretty much all 1 and 2. That makes me feel good that I didn't have any 3s that I'm seeing. Let me scroll through everybody. Okay, awesome. So let me stop sharing so I can see y'all again. Okay, I'm just looking real quick at the chats, yeah. Yeah, you guys are dead on right. Everybody's saying, yeah, like if you're familiar with Writer's Workshop or Balanced Literacy or some of those kinds of things, running logs, that is very much focused on that assessment piece and the valuative feedback. Yeah. Oh, Richard, you want to explain your comment? That's really interesting.
I've worked in a lot of schools, especially in urban New Orleans, where the kids could not be bothered to get a grade or oftentimes show up to class. But when you actually something that they did, you found some victory for the kiddo. That might have been the first time that they weren't, kind of ground down, beaten down, called an idiot by somebody above them, a teacher, parent, somebody. And so those kids that don't give a flying fig about grades, they're the ones that want your attention. They want it positive, they want it negative, but they really want it positive.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience.
Richard, that's a great point, and thank you for bringing that up, guys, because I think that as teachers as a whole, now I'm stereotyping, so forgive me, but we were all conditioned over the courses of our learning experiences to care about grades, right? But a lot of our students come to our schools, just like Richard said, and like Richard, I've worked in a bunch of different schools. My experience has all been urban. I've never worked in a suburban school. I've never worked in a rural school. And you're right, a lot of kids, grades don't mean anything because in their minds, now, part of the goal of education is to change their minds, but college isn't an option. So why do I care about grades? I don't care, I'm just going to, I've literally had students tell me, I'm just going to be on, welfare when I get out. So, who cares? I'm just coming to school, to avoid the truancy officer until I'm old enough to drop out. And so teachers come in and they threaten people with failing grades and all this kind of stuff. And it's not only ineffective, it's destructive. And, and while we're forced oftentimes through our systems to award a grade, giving kids true, honest feedback about everything is really how we can leverage their desire to learn and to grow and to have that internal motivation. So, unfortunately, the state and the, rural Appalachia, yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, the systems, we even now give schools letter grades across the country. It's ridiculous, which means little of nothing. A is good, C is bad. When in reality, that C school for them to get a C is like the most miraculous thing ever. And some schools should just get an A because they exist, and their kids come with everything plus some that they need. But the whole idea behind really using assessment to improve instruction, because that is what this course is supposed to be about, is through our dialogues, is through our feedback, is through that conversation. When we don't use those opportunities with our kids, then we really are missing the boat. We're not helping them to strengthen their learning and their understanding. And at the end of the day, I really am proud of what our vision statement was that we came up with when I was principal at MacArthur High School in Irving. And it was very simple. It was simply that our job was to prepare students for whatever they wanted to do in life after graduation. So if that meant you wanted to go be a medical doctor, you had the skill set and you could get into the right college, you could get through the right classes, you could get there. If your goal in life was to go into the military, that you could go in with a set of skills. So we're going to give you options and opportunities when they gave you the ASVAB, kind of thing. If you wanted to be a plumber, that you could actually read the plumber's manual and you could pass the tests and all those kind of things. It was this bigger calling. That was never going to happen if all we focused on were grades. You have to, and I know it's time consuming. I know it's hard. I know what it's like when you've got, because I struggle. I have 150 students sometimes in my classes. It's hard to give that back to everybody, but it's the most valuable tool and resource we can give to our kids and parents too. If they really, but we have to spend time educating our parents about why this kind of feedback matters most. Okay. Any other comments or things? Oh, Melissa, I know that makes me so sad. Yeah, if y'all aren't watching the chat, you might want to pull it up and read it. Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of college, too, this is just a piece of probably useless information, but I don't know if you know this, but the Ivy League schools now have changed their tuition rates. And so, like, if you want to go, if you can qualify and get into Harvard, your tuition is only 10% of your family's annual income. So if you make $100,000 a year as a family, it's only $10,000 in tuition. It's no longer, a certain amount, because they really want students from all strata, not just our wealthiest kind of families and stuff. And so, yeah, we've got to help our kids. I mean, I've literally seen kids go to Harvard for free. I've seen kids go to MIT for free. We just had to get them there, kind of thing. So that's why I think this is so important.
A lot of kids, they even have that mindset that they just want to not, because of their upbringing and their families, they just don't want to go to prison, or they don't want to get shot in a gang because, they have so much of that going on at their home life. So school is just almost like a way to escape.
Yeah. Sarah brings that too. Sarah, you want to talk about what you posted here? Because I think that's an interesting idea.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm using my kid's gaming headset. I don't know. I agree. I agree with Richard that feedback is it's so valuable. Even the Atta girls on the comments for our grades is valuable. Who doesn't love that? And I think it helps even direct where we should go. But there's something about having that 4.0 or that 4.5 that the ranking matters. And maybe it's the competitive, I don't know what it is. I guess I'm in a school that has a lot of students who go on to a secondary education, whether it's like a technical degree or 2-year college, 4-year college, beyond that. I don't know, the grade means a lot to them. There's a lot of value in it.
Yeah, and it probably is somewhat dependent on your demographics. I know when I was principal at MacArthur High School, they used to do something called the top 10. So the students who had the top 10 GPA. So we of course, everybody names a valedictorian and a salutatorian. Then we would allow students who were ranked 3 through 10 based on their GPA to sit on the stage at graduation. And it was the craziest thing ever, the lengths students and their parents would go to be in that top 10, to the point of gross manipulation of the system in terms of what classes they took, how their grades were calculated. I mean, all this kind of stuff. We did away with it because we're like, in our ideal world, everybody would be in the top 10 with great GPAs because they've earned them. And so I think, Sarah, like I said earlier, I think what we're beginning to see is a little bit of a pushback towards the GPA, because what does it really mean? And more colleges are not using GPA in their admissions requirements for admission. So, like I said, right now we as a system, post-secondary schools and institutions, technical colleges, whatever, we have created a system where that grade point matters. But I'm beginning to see a movement away from that. So I'm curious, as more and more schools are saying, hey, we don't care about your GPA as much as we care about maybe, your resume or, your SAT scores or whatever they decide is going to be important. How that's going to change maybe that mindset in some of our schools where 95+% of the students go on to post-secondary education. Okay. So have I convinced you to use formative assessment? I'm sure you guys already do because you're superstars. Maybe you can convince your colleagues to use it now. Okay. Any other questions or comments, guys? Interesting comments tonight. Okay, well, I'm going to let you get 4 minutes of your life back tonight. So y'all have a great week, and we'll see you next week for our very last Zoom meeting. And I'll probably go ahead and open up the final exam. I may open it up Friday or Monday, one of the two. I'm not sure. Oh, thanks, Richard. Yeah, I'm going to go home and have a hot toddy or something. All right, you guys have a great evening. I'm going to turn off